My husband told me not to come home for Christmas. He said his CEO was staying over, and my presence as a mid-level remote worker would ruin his chances at a promotion. So after a 30-hour international flight, I stood freezing outside the airport, completely locked out of my own life. I did exactly what he asked and stayed away. But 3 hours later, my phone started ringing endlessly. It was him, panic in his voice, demanding to know why my name was suddenly flashing across national television as the ruthless billionaire who just bought his entire company. The brutal wind coming off Jamaica Bay whipped through my thin trench coat as I stood on the curb outside John F. Kennedy International Airport. I had just survived a grueling 30-hour flight back from Tokyo, running on nothing but stale airplane coffee and the desperate desire to sleep in my own bed on Christmas Eve. Instead, I was staring at my phone, listening to the man I had been married to for 5 years tell me I was a liability. David's voice was crisp and devoid of any warmth, echoing through the receiver with the sterile efficiency of a corporate memo. He told me I was not allowed to come back to our luxury brownstone in Manhattan tonight. Mr. Sterling, the CEO of his firm, was flying in from London with his wife, and David had offered our home as their personal holiday retreat. He claimed this was the final test before he secured his promotion to vice president, and according to David, my presence would simply ruin the aesthetic. I asked him where exactly I was supposed to go on Christmas Eve after traveling halfway across the world. His sigh was loud, heavy, and dripping with irritation. He told me to figure it out. He said I was a grown woman and could easily book a room at a Marriott near the airport. Then he delivered the blow he had been practicing for years. He told me that his boss was accustomed to a certain caliber of society, the kind of elite, polished circles that David belonged to. He reminded me yet again that my quiet work from home administrative job and my historically black college degree just did not fit the image he needed to project. He said I lacked the sophisticated polish of his sister Naya and her husband Connor, who were currently at the house helping him host. He actually used the phrase mid-level administrative presence to describe his own wife. Before I could even process the sheer cruelty of his words, he told me to stay out of sight and hung up. I stood there on the concrete, the freezing rain beginning to mix with the sleet, letting the absolute disrespect wash over me. For 5 years, I had played the part of the quiet, unremarkable wife. I wore the simple cardigans, I kept my head down at his corporate dinners, and I let him believe he was the sole provider, the brilliant financial mind of the family. He loved feeling superior. He thrived on it. My phone buzzed in my hand, vibrating against my numb fingers. It was a text message, but not from my husband. It was from Connor, my white brother-in-law. Connor was a mid-level real estate developer who married into our family and immediately acted like he owned it. He carried an unbearable sense of entitlement, always treating me like the hired help rather than a relative. The text message was long, and reading it made my blood run cold. Connor wrote that he and David had spent all week preparing the brownstone for the Sterlings. He told me to just book a cheap motel and stay out of David's way so he could secure this promotion. He actually had the audacity to type that I needed to understand my place, that corporate finance was a high-stakes game, and my plain, unsophisticated lifestyle would only embarrass David in front of the people who actually mattered. He ended the message by offering to Venmo me $100 for a budget hotel room. They really thought I was nothing. They truly believed I was a helpless, financially dependent woman who would quietly drag her suitcase to a roadside motel and cry herself to sleep while they drank expensive champagne in the home I secretly paid for. I did not cry. I did not argue. I simply turned away from the crowded taxi stand and walked back inside the airport terminal, seeking the warmth of the first-class luxury lounge. The lounge was quiet, smelling of rich coffee and expensive leather. I sat down in a plush armchair facing the massive television screens that lined the far wall. The Financial News Network was broadcasting live, wrapping up their evening market analysis before the holiday break. I ordered a hot tea, crossed my legs, and watched the screen. The breaking news banner flashed in bright red letters across the bottom of the television. The anchor's voice grew excited as she announced that Sterling Financial's The very firm my husband was currently bending over backwards to impress had just been subjected to a massive hostile takeover by a shadow-holding company named Apex Ventures. The anchor went on to explain that the acquisition was ruthless swift and completely restructured the board of directors effective immediately. Then the screen transitioned to a full-screen graphic displaying the name of the new majority shareholder and ultimate CEO of the parent company. My name. My full, unapologetic name displayed in bold white letters for the entire financial world to see. I took a slow sip of my tea. My phone, which had been silent for the last 20 minutes, suddenly erupted. It vibrated so violently on the glass table that it nearly slid off the edge. It was David. He was calling. I ignored it. He called again. I ignored it. Then came the text messages flooding in one after another in a panicked frenzy. He asked what was going on. He demanded to know if this was a joke, a glitch in the broadcast, or some insane coincidence. His final message was a frantic plea asking why my name was currently on the television screen, right as his boss was pouring a drink in our living room. I looked at the message, reading Connor's insulting text right above it, and felt a profound, beautiful sense of peace. I did not write a long paragraph explaining myself. I did not demand an apology. I simply blocked David's phone number. Then I blocked Connor's phone number. I stood up, smoothed out my coat, and walked out the private VIP exit of the lounge. A sleek black Rolls-Royce was idling quietly at the curb, sent by my personal legal team. The driver stepped out, opening the door with a respectful nod, addressing me as Madam CEO. I slid into the heated leather back seat, looking out the tinted window as we pulled away from the airport. David wanted me to stay away so he could impress his boss. Little did he know he was about to find out that his boss now worked for me. The leather seats of the Rolls-Royce were a warm sanctuary against the biting New York winter. As the city lights blurred past the tinted windows, I leaned back and allowed myself a single deep breath. The car glided smoothly toward the Upper East Side, stopping in front of a sleek high-rise building that David did not even know existed. I owned the penthouse suite on the top floor. I had purchased it 3 years ago through a blind trust, paying entirely in cash. My wealth did not materialize out of thin air. It was the product of relentless, quiet grinding after David had laughed at my ambition. Early in our marriage, I had pitched him a concept for a tech startup investment. I had done the market research, stayed up until 3 in the morning, analyzing data, and presented him with a solid business plan. He had patted my head, chuckled condescendingly, and told me to leave the high-level finance to him. He suggested I stick to my comfortable remote administrative job and focus on picking out nice curtains for the brownstone. I did exactly that. I kept my head down, lived frugally on his terms, and quietly funneled every spare dollar I earned into angel investing. My early investments exploded. One successful tech acquisition led to another, and within 5 years, I was the silent founder of Apex Ventures. I built an empire in the shadows, while David spent his evenings bragging to his fraternity brothers about his climbing the corporate ladder at Sterling Financials. He thought he was the titan of our household. He had no idea he was sleeping next to a billionaire. The private elevator opened directly into my penthouse. The space was immaculate, featuring floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the Manhattan skyline. I dropped my coat onto a velvet chair and walked straight to the kitchen island, opening my laptop. David had always complained that I was terrible with technology. 6 months ago, he asked me to fix the offline security cameras in our brownstone. I told him the system was broken and needed a complete replacement. In reality, I had simply rerouted the administrative access directly to my private server. I typed in my password and brought up the live feed of our living room. What I saw on the screen made my jaw tighten. I had expected to see David desperately trying to impress Mr. Sterling and his wife with expensive scotch and rehearsed corporate jargon. Mr. Sterling was there, sitting on the custom Italian leather sofa I had selected, but his wife was absent. Instead, David was standing by the fireplace, his arm wrapped intimately around the waist of a striking woman in her mid-20s. She had flowing blonde hair and was wearing a designer dress paid for by an account I now realized I needed to audit. I turned up the volume on the feed. David was handing Mr. Sterling a glass of scotch, smiling that charming, practiced smile he used to win over clients. He pointed to the blonde woman and introduced her to his CEO, not as a friend, not as a colleague, but as his fiancée, Chloe. He actually told his boss that they were planning a spring wedding in the Hamptons. The sheer audacity of his lie was almost impressive. He had banished his actual wife to the freezing streets of New York on Christmas Eve, just so he could play house with a mistress and secure a promotion. He was using the home I furnished, the life I maintained, to build a fraudulent future with another woman. The soft chime of the private elevator interrupted the sick performance playing out on my screen. The polished steel doors parted, and Valerie stepped into the penthouse. Valerie was my lead corporate counsel, a fierce, brilliant black woman who had guided Apex Ventures through its most ruthless acquisitions. She wore a tailored crimson suit and carried a thick leather briefcase that looked heavy enough to be a weapon. We had been working together for years, and she was one of the few people who knew the full truth about my dual life. Valerie did not bother with pleasantries. She walked straight to the kitchen island, dropped the briefcase on the marble counter, and glanced at the security feed playing on my laptop. A cold smile touched the corners of her mouth as she watched David kiss Chloe on the cheek. "He is putting on quite the show," Valerie noted, pulling a thick stack of printed documents from her bag. "But his performance is about to get extremely expensive. I had my forensic accounting team run a quiet sweep on his personal and joint accounts the moment you gave the green light this afternoon. What we found is pathetic." I closed the laptop screen, giving Valerie my full attention. "Tell me everything." Valerie spread the documents across the marble. "David has been draining your joint savings account for the past 14 months. He masked the withdrawals as high-yield mutual fund investments. In reality, he has been using marital funds to pay the lease on a luxury apartment in Soho for Chloe. He also bought her a Mercedes SUV and funded her recent vacation to St. Bart's." I felt a cold, calculating calm settle over me. David had always monitored my spending, criticizing me if I bought a slightly more expensive brand of coffee, yet he was siphoning tens of thousands of dollars to finance his mistress. "But that is just the appetizer," Valerie continued, her eyes gleaming with predatory excitement. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small silver flash drive, placing it deliberately in the center of the table. "The real problem is his loyalty to his brother-in-law. You mentioned Connor was acting incredibly arrogant in his text messages to you today. Now we know why." I looked at the flash drive, then up at Valerie. "What did Connor do?" "Connor is a failing real estate developer who likes to pretend he plays in the big leagues," Valerie said smoothly. "He got in way over his head with some bad investments. My team dug into the internal ledgers at Sterling Financials, utilizing the access we gained during the acquisition. Connor has been embezzling money from the firm through dummy vendor accounts. He has siphoned nearly $2 million over the past year to keep his failing business afloat." I stared at her, the pieces of the puzzle snapping together with crystal clarity. "And David is the vice president of regional accounts," Valerie replied. "Connor needed an inside man to approve those dummy vendor invoices and bypass the standard compliance checks. David signed off on every single one of those fraudulent transfers. He risked his career, his freedom, and his reputation just to help his entitled white brother-in-law steal from the very company he was trying to impress. The magnitude of their stupidity was breathtaking. David had treated me like a burden, an unsophisticated anchor weighing down his grand corporate ambitions. Meanwhile, he and Connor were committing federal wire fraud right under the nose of the CEO they were currently entertaining in my living room. They thought they were untouchable. They thought they were the smartest men in the room." Valerie tapped her manicured fingernail against the silver flash drive. "We have the wire transfers, the IP addresses, and the digital signatures. We have everything we need to bury them both so deep they will never see the inside of a boardroom again." She folded her hands and looked at me, a dangerous, thrilling energy radiating from her. So Valerie asked softly, "What is the play, boss?" I looked at the silver flash drive resting on my marble counter, then up at Valerie's expectant face. "The play," I told her quietly, "is that we let them enjoy their Christmas. I instructed my lawyer to initiate a quiet legal freeze on all their secondary assets, but to hold the formal criminal filings until Monday. I wanted Marcus to spend his favorite holiday looking over his shoulder, slowly realizing that the foundation of his entire life was crumbling beneath his feet. When Christmas morning broke over Manhattan, the winter sun flooded my penthouse with brilliant freezing light. I sat on my velvet sofa wrapped in a silk robe that cost more than Marcus's entire holiday bonus and finally unblocked his phone number. I did not intend to speak to him. I simply wanted to listen to the panic. Within seconds, the notifications flooded my screen. 14 voicemails had been left overnight. I poured myself a fresh cup of coffee and played the first one. Marcus sounded completely unhinged. His voice oscillated between arrogant rage and absolute unfiltered terror. In the first few messages, he demanded I stop playing games, accusing me of hacking the television network or orchestrating some elaborate psychotic prank to humiliate him in front of Mr. Sterling. But by the eighth voicemail left somewhere around 4 in the morning, his tone had drastically shifted. He was hyperventilating. He begged me to pick up the phone, demanding to know if it was just a bizarre coincidence that the billionaire buyer shared my exact name. He pleaded with me to tell him I was just staying at a cheap motel like Connor suggested. He sounded like a man who was standing on the edge of a cliff in the dark. I deleted every single voicemail without responding. It was time to go to work. I moved to my home office and logged into a highly classified virtual board meeting. The screen populated with the terrified faces of the Sterling Financial's executive board. Mr. Sterling himself looked like he had not slept a wink. His usual corporate swagger was entirely gone, replaced by the nervous energy of a man who knew his career was entirely in the hands of a stranger. When my camera turned on, showing me sitting in a multi-million-dollar penthouse rather than a cramped administrative cubicle, the color visibly drained from his face. He recognized me. He had seen me at exactly one corporate dinner 2 years ago, where Marcus had introduced me as his quiet stay-at-home wife before shuffling me into a corner. I did not offer any pleasantries. I introduced myself as the majority shareholder of Apex Ventures and the new owner of their entire operation. The silence on the video call was deafening. I informed the board that effective immediately, their company was undergoing a massive structural cleansing. My first official directive as CEO was a full unannounced forensic audit of the Regional Accounts Department, the exact department Marcus and his entitled brother-in-law used as their personal piggy bank. I ordered the audit to begin at 9 o'clock sharp on Monday morning. I watched Mr. Sterling frantically nod in agreement, too terrified to ask why I was specifically targeting his golden boy vice president. After terminating the call, I needed a change of scenery. I dressed in a tailored cashmere coat and walked down to a luxury cafe situated a few blocks from my building. The crisp morning air felt invigorating. I ordered a cappuccino and sat at a quiet corner table watching the holiday crowds bundle up against the cold. I had only been sitting there for 10 minutes when the bell above the cafe door chimed. I looked up and saw my sister-in-law Nia marching inside with her white husband Connor trailing closely behind her. They scanned the room aggressively before their eyes locked onto me. They had tracked my phone location. Marcus had insisted we share our locations on a family app years ago for safety reasons, which was really just a tool for him to monitor my movements. Nia and Connor marched over to my table, pulling up chairs without asking for permission. Nia looked me up and down, her eyes narrowing at my expensive coat, clearly misinterpreting the situation. She crossed her arms and leaned forward, dripping with the kind of condescension she had perfected over the years. She told me I needed to stop embarrassing myself. She said Marcus was out of his mind with stress because I had thrown a childish temper tantrum and maxed out his credit cards to stay at some fancy hotel nearby just to spite him. Connor leaned back in his chair, exuding the unearned confidence of a mediocre white man who believed he was the savior of every situation. He let out a loud, patronizing sigh and shook his head. He told me that Marcus was on the verge of a massive promotion, a promotion that was going to benefit the entire family. He said my jealousy and my inability to fit into their high society world was becoming a serious liability. Then Connor reached into his designer jacket and pulled out his checkbook. He clicked a gold pen and scribbled a number across the paper with dramatic flair. He ripped the check from the pad and slid it across the cafe table until it rested right next to my coffee cup. It was a check for $10,000. Take this, Connor said, his voice lowering into a fake sympathetic whisper. Use it to pay off whatever hotel bill you just racked up, find yourself a nice little apartment in a cheaper borough, and file for a quiet divorce. Do not ruin my brother-in-law's career just because you are bitter, Maya. Let us be honest, you do not belong in our world. I looked down at the check. $10,000. It was a fraction of the money he had stolen from my company. I slowly picked up the piece of paper, holding it between my fingers. I looked at Nia, who was smirking triumphantly, and then I looked at Connor, whose arrogant smile was plastered firmly across his face. Without breaking eye contact with Connor, I gripped the edges of the check and tore it cleanly in half. I placed the torn pieces back onto the table and slid them toward his chest. Connor's smile vanished. His face twisted in confusion and anger as he opened his mouth to berate me again. But I leaned forward, resting my arms on the table, and cut him off with a whisper that froze the blood in his veins. Check your offshore accounts, Connor. The audit started an hour ago. Monday morning hit Manhattan with a freezing rain, but Marcus walked into the glass lobby of Sterling Financials feeling like the sun was shining exclusively on him. He adjusted his silk tie while practicing his humble yet confident smile in the reflection of the elevator doors. Today was the day. After spending the entire holiday weekend entertaining Mr. Sterling and parading Chloe around the brownstone as his sophisticated future wife, the vice president promotion was essentially a guaranteed lock. He stepped onto the 42nd floor, ready to accept the quiet awe and congratulations of his subordinates. Instead, the door slid open to absolute pandemonium. The usually pristine corporate bullpen looked like the site of a federal raid. Dozens of unfamiliar men and women wearing sharp charcoal suits and carrying clipboards were swarming the floor. They were systematically unplugging desktop computers, packing hard drives into anti-static bags, and slapping barcode stickers across filing cabinets. The low hum of confident finance executives had been replaced by the frantic whispers and choked sobs of junior analysts packing their personal belongings into cardboard boxes. Marcus froze. He grabbed the arm of a passing intern who was clutching a potted plant to his chest. He demanded to know what was happening. The intern stared at him with wide and terrified eyes, stammering that a forensic strike team from Apex Ventures had seized control of the building at 6 in the morning. They were freezing all assets, locking down the servers, and liquidating entire departments without offering any severance packages. Marcus shoved past the trembling kid and sprinted down the hallway toward the executive suites. His heart hammered against his ribs, and a cold sweat broke out across his forehead. He burst through the heavy mahogany doors of the CEO office without bothering to knock. Mr. Sterling was slumped behind his massive desk, looking like a man who had aged 20 years over the weekend. His tie was undone, his expensive suit jacket lay discarded on the floor, and his hands were shaking violently as he scrolled through endless lines of red text on his monitor. Marcus slammed his hands down on the desk, demanding an immediate explanation. He reminded his boss about their wonderful Christmas Eve dinner, about the promotion they had discussed over expensive scotch, and about the loyalty he had shown to the firm. Mr. Sterling looked up, his eyes bloodshot and filled with pure venom. He let out a harsh and bitter laugh. He told Marcus that the promotion was gone, the department was gone, and by the end of the day, the entire firm might be gone. The new parent company was not just restructuring the business, they were gutting the place from the inside out. They had flagged massive financial discrepancies in the regional accounts division. Marcus felt the blood drain completely from his face. The regional accounts division was his exclusive domain. It was where he had been quietly approving the fraudulent vendor invoices for Connor. Desperation clawed at his throat. He leaned over the desk and told Mr. Sterling to call Connor immediately. He argued that Connor had powerful connections, that his real estate firm brought millions in revenue to their portfolio, and that his white brother-in-law could certainly smooth things over with the new ownership. Mr. Sterling pointed a trembling finger toward the glass walls of the executive conference room across the hall. He told Marcus to look for himself. Marcus turned and peered through the blinds. Inside the soundproof glass room, Connor was sitting at a long table completely surrounded by forensic accountants. The arrogant and untouchable man who had mocked my administrative job just 3 days ago was currently sweating through his designer shirt, his face buried in his hands, openly weeping as an auditor slid a massive stack of forged wire transfers across the table. Panic, absolute and blinding, finally seized Marcus. He backed away from the CEO desk, turned on his heel, and sprinted into the emergency stairwell. The heavy fire door slammed shut behind him, plunging him into the quiet echo of the concrete shaft. His hands shook so violently he could barely unlock his phone. He dialed Chloe. She answered on the second ring, her voice bright and bubbly, clearly expecting him to announce his new vice president's salary. Marcus did not have time for pleasantries. He kept his voice to a frantic whisper, telling her that the firm was under a hostile audit and that federal authorities might be involved. He instructed her to log into the private accounts he had set up for her, the ones funded by the money he had siphoned from our joint marital savings. He begged her to drain the accounts immediately, move the cash into her personal offshore accounts, and pack a bag so they could lay low until the storm passed. The bright and bubbly tone instantly vanished from the other end of the line. The silence that followed was heavy and cold. Chloe asked him very slowly if he was implying that the money paying for her luxury apartment and her Mercedes was stolen. Marcus pleaded with her, saying it did not matter where the money came from, only that they needed to protect it from the auditors and from his crazy soon-to-be ex-wife. Chloe let out a sharp sigh. She told Marcus that she was a young and beautiful woman with a reputation to maintain in Manhattan high society. She said she did not date broke, disgraced middle managers facing federal indictment. Before Marcus could even beg, Chloe informed him that she was leaving the keys to the Mercedes on the kitchen counter and taking the next flight to Dubai with a different investor. She told him never to contact her again. The line went dead. Marcus stood in the freezing stairwell, staring at his darkened phone screen. He had thrown away his marriage, his home, and his integrity for a woman who viewed him as nothing more than a walking bank account. And now the account was empty. He stumbled back into the hallway, feeling physically ill. He needed to talk to Mr. Sterling again. He needed to find a way to pin the blame entirely on Connor and save his own skin. He pushed open the mahogany doors just as the CEO printer whirred to life. Mr. Sterling was staring at his computer screen, his face completely devoid of color. He looked like a man reading his own obituary. He did not even blink as Marcus walked up to the desk. Mr. Sterling slowly raised his head, his eyes locking onto Marcus with a mixture of terror and disbelief. He said he had just received a direct and encrypted email from the new CEO of Apex Ventures. The elusive billionaire owner was finally stepping out of the shadows. Marcus grabbed the edge of the desk, his voice a hoarse whisper, as he asked what the email said. Mr. Sterling swallowed hard, his throat clicking in the quiet room. He said the new owner was making her very first public appearance at the company New Year Gala this Friday night. And she had issued one specific and non-negotiable mandate. Mr. Sterling turned the monitor so Marcus could see the bold text glaring from the screen. She specifically requested that you and Connor be in attendance. Mr. Sterling whispered, his voice trembling, and she ordered that you both be seated front and center. The sheer terror Marcus felt staring at that computer screen was a satisfying thought, but I did not have time to dwell on his misery. Friday had finally arrived, and the New Year Eve gala at the Plaza Hotel was only hours away. For the past 5 years, I had attended these corporate functions as a shadow. I wore muted colors, kept my hair pulled back in simple styles, and smiled politely, while Marcus paraded around the grand ballroom networking with executives who never bothered to learn my name. I had deliberately made myself invisible to protect his fragile ego. Tonight the shadow was stepping into the blinding light. I stood in the center of the master suite in my penthouse while a team of top-tier stylists circled me like artists working on a masterpiece. My lead stylist, a brilliant black woman who regularly dressed Hollywood royalty, fastened the final hook of my gown. The dress was a custom-made, emerald silk creation that flowed around me like liquid glass. It was bold, unapologetic, and commanded immediate attention. My hair was styled in a stunning cascading blowout, and my makeup was absolutely flawless, highlighting the sharp contours of my face. I slipped on a pair of diamond drop earrings that caught the light brilliantly with every slight movement. When I looked in the full-length mirror, the quiet, accommodating administrative worker was completely gone. The woman staring back at me looked exactly like what she was, a billionaire titan preparing to claim her empire. Before heading to the plaza, there was one final piece of business I needed to attend to. I took my private car back to the brownstone to pack the last of my personal items. The house felt entirely different now, stripped of the emotional hold it once had over me. I was quietly placing a few sentimental books into a leather tote bag when the front door slammed open violently. Marcus marched into the living room, bringing the freezing winter air in with him. His tie was loosened, his eyes were bloodshot, and he carried the frantic, manic energy of a man whose professional life was spiraling out of control. He stopped dead in his tracks when he saw me standing calmly by the bookshelf. He did not notice the subtle changes in my demeanor. He was too consumed by his own panic to see anything but a reflection of his multiplying problems. He stormed over to me, his chest heaving, and immediately launched into a rehearsed, highly patronizing speech. He told me he had endured the worst week of his professional life and that he simply did not have the patience for my childish behavior anymore. He actually tried to convince me that the news broadcast I saw at the airport was a massive typographical error. He gaslit me with practiced ease, claiming the television network had made a foolish mistake with the name of the new Apex Ventures CEO, and that I was completely delusional for thinking it had anything to do with my life. Marcus paced back and forth across the hardwood floor, waving his hands frantically as he spoke. He said his firm was undergoing a hostile audit. Connor was caught up in some ridiculous misunderstanding with the accounting department, and the new billionaire owner had personally demanded their presence at the gala tonight. He stopped pacing abruptly, pointed a trembling finger at my face, and lowered his voice into a threatening register. He demanded that I stop this ridiculous rebellion immediately. He told me that if I wanted to save our marriage and prove I was a loyal partner, I needed to put on a modest dress, accompany him to the gala, and play the supportive, invisible wife. He insisted that he needed to project the image of a stable, grounded family man to impress the new CEO and save his career. He actually believed he could snap his fingers and force me back into the tiny box he had built for me so long ago. I watched him perform this pathetic display of manipulation without showing a single ounce of emotion. I did not yell. I did not argue. I did not point out the hypocrisy of him demanding my loyalty while he had been parading his mistress around this very living room just days ago. Yelling would imply that his toxic words still held power over me. Instead, I remained perfectly calm, my stony silence unnerving him far more than a loud argument ever could. I picked up the dry-cleaned tuxedo that his assistant had dropped off earlier that morning. It was encased in protective plastic, hanging perfectly straight on a solid cedar hanger. I walked over to Marcus and gently pressed the hanger directly into his chest, forcing him to take it. I looked directly into his panicked, exhausted eyes and offered him a serene, chilling smile. "Make sure you look your best on Friday, Marcus," I told him, my voice completely smooth and unwavering. "It is going to be a night you will never forget." Marcus scoffed loudly, rolling his eyes as he snatched the tuxedo roughly from my hands. He muttered something hateful under his breath about my absolute delusions, shaking his head as he turned his back on me and marched heavily up the stairs to get dressed. He truly believed he had won the conversation. He believed I was just a bitter, defeated woman clinging desperately to a broken marriage. I picked up my leather tote bag and walked out the front door, leaving the brownstone behind for the very last time. The cold evening air felt incredibly refreshing against my skin. As I settled comfortably into the back seat of my waiting car, my phone vibrated inside my purse. I pulled it out and opened a brief text message from Valerie, my lawyer. The message contained a single sentence that made a genuine smile spread across my face. "Chloe just RSVP'd to the gala as Marcus +1. The stage is perfectly set." The Plaza Hotel ballroom was a masterclass in opulence and power. Crystal chandeliers cast a golden glow over the New Year Eve gala. This was the pinnacle of corporate gatherings, a showcase of Black excellence and influence in Manhattan. Waiters in white jackets moved silently through the crowd, carrying silver trays lined with crystal flutes of champagne. Jazz music drifted from a live band, providing the perfect soundtrack for the high-stakes networking happening below. Marcus was in his element. He stood near the center of the room, wearing the tuxedo I had handed him hours earlier. He worked the crowd with a desperate energy, flashing his practiced smile at anyone holding a title higher than his own. Chloe stood glued to his side, wearing a plunging crimson dress paid for by my marital funds. She clung to his arm, laughing a little too loudly at jokes she did not understand. Near the mahogany bar, while Marcus tried to project the image of a rising star, his white brother-in-law was visibly unraveling. Connor looked terrified. He sweated through his tailored suit jacket, knocking back his fourth glass of whiskey. The silent audit that had swept through Sterling Financials that morning was eating him alive. He kept checking his phone, paranoid that federal agents were going to march through the doors at any second. His wife Nia stood beside him, completely oblivious to his impending doom, scolding him for drinking too fast. The heavy doors of his ballroom swung open, and I stepped across the threshold. I walked with the slow, deliberate grace of a woman who owned the ground beneath her feet. The custom emerald silk gown flowed around my legs, catching the chandelier light and making me look like I was carved from a precious stone. My hair cascaded perfectly over my shoulders, and the diamond drop earrings framed my face with cold, undeniable power. A sudden ripple of hushed whispers spread quickly through the crowd near the grand entrance. People who did not even know me could sense the absolute authority radiating from my presence. I scanned the massive room, my eyes sweeping over the sea of tailored suits and designer gowns until they locked directly onto Marcus. Marcus turned his head to see what everyone was looking at. From across the ballroom, Marcus saw a striking, powerful woman commanding the attention of the elite. I watched his eyes travel over the emerald gown, captivated for a fleeting second before a profound confusion set in. He blinked hard, tilting his head as his brain struggled to process the information. It took him 3 full and agonizing seconds to finally realize that the breathtaking woman stopping the room was the exact same woman he had banished to the freezing streets of New York on Christmas Eve. When the realization finally hit him, the blood drained from his face. His charming, practiced smile collapsed into a mask of pure fury. He dropped Chloe's hand so fast she actually stumbled forward. I did not wait for him to approach. I continued my unhurried walk directly toward the cordoned-off VIP section near the main stage. I could see Marcus practically sprinting through the crowd out of the corner of my eye, shoving past executives and apologizing hastily as he made a beeline for me. His face was twisted into an ugly snarl, his jaw clenched so tightly a vein pulsed in his neck. He intercepted me just as I reached the velvet rope separating the VIP tables from the main floor. Before I could even turn to acknowledge him, Marcus reached out and grabbed my upper arm. His grip was tight, possessive, and painful. He yanked me backward, trying to force me out of the line of sight of his superiors. He leaned down, bringing his face inches from mine, and hissed through gritted teeth. He demanded to know what I was doing there. He asked if I had completely lost my mind, accusing me of renting a gown I could not afford just to stalk him and humiliate him in public. He told me I was going to ruin his last chance to save his career and impress the new Apex Ventures owners. I did not flinch. I did not pull away. I simply looked down at the hand gripping my arm, then back up into his panicked, raging eyes. I told him very calmly to let go of me. Marcus scoffed, his grip tightening even further. He told me I was out of my league and out of my mind. He raised his free hand and snapped his fingers aggressively in the air, trying to flag down the venue security team stationed near the stage. He shouted for security to come over immediately, claiming a trespasser had crashed the private corporate event and needed to be escorted off the premises before she caused a scene. 2 massive security guards in dark suits immediately broke away from their posts near the stage and marched briskly toward us. Marcus let out a harsh, victorious laugh. He leaned in close again, whispering that I had brought this humiliation upon myself, and that he would be filing the divorce papers the second the weekend was over. He turned to the approaching guards, pointing his finger at my chest, and ordered them to drag me out the back service doors so the executives would not see. But the guards did not look at Marcus. They did not even glance at his pointing finger. Instead, the head of security stepped directly into Marcus's personal space and forcefully pried his fingers off my arm, twisting his wrist just enough to make him gasp in pain and step back. The guard then turned his back on my husband, faced me, and bowed his head respectfully. "Is this man bothering you tonight?" "Madam CEO, the head of security?" asked his deep voice, booming clearly and echoing over the jazz music playing in the background. "Is this man bothering you tonight, Madam CEO, the head of security?" asked his deep voice, booming clearly and echoing over the jazz music playing in the background. Marcus stared at the massive security guard, his brain completely misfiring. For a moment, the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel seemed to stand entirely still. Marcus let out a sharp, nervous laugh that cracked in the middle. He looked at the guard, then looked at me, shaking his head, as if he were dealing with an unruly child. "There has been a ridiculous mistake," Marcus said, waving his hand dismissively at the head of security. "You are thoroughly confused. This woman is not a CEO. She is my wife. Well, my soon-to-be ex-wife. She is a low-level administrative worker who managed to sneak past the front desk and crash a highly secure corporate event. Grab her by the arm and escort her out to the service alley before my boss sees this disaster." The head of security did not blink. He did not move a single muscle toward me. Instead, he stepped directly between Marcus and me, crossing his thick arms over his chest, forming a solid human barricade. He kept his eyes locked on Marcus, waiting for me to give the final order. Before I could speak, Chloe stepped out from the crowd. She clutched the skirt of her plunging crimson dress, the very dress my marital funds had purchased, and marched over to Marcus. She looked me up and down, her eyes lingering on the custom emerald silk of my gown. I could see the raw, burning envy flashing in her gaze, but she quickly masked it with an ugly sneer. "Marcus, what is taking so long?" Chloe whined, tugging aggressively on his tuxedo sleeve. "Who is this tacky woman? Tell these guards to do their job and throw her out onto the street. We are supposed to be sitting at the executive table waiting for the new billionaire owner to arrive. You promised me we would be front and center tonight." I looked at Chloe. I did not raise my voice. I did not insult her appearance. I simply offered her a smile so cold it could have frozen the champagne in her glass. She was a pawn who had unknowingly walked onto a chessboard completely controlled by the queen. Marcus opened his mouth to apologize to his mistress, but he was suddenly shoved hard from behind. "Make way! Move aside immediately!" Mr. Sterling, the CEO of Sterling Financials, pushed his way through the circle of executives that had formed around us. He was sweating profusely, his face flushed red and his breathing heavy. Marcus saw his boss approaching and immediately tried to switch back into his charismatic corporate persona. He smoothed his lapels and stepped toward Mr. Sterling with an eager, apologetic smile. "Mr. Sterling, I am so incredibly sorry for this unseemly disturbance," Marcus said smoothly, gesturing toward me like I was a piece of trash on the polished floor. Security made a foolish identification error. My estranged wife somehow bypassed the guest list. I was just instructing them to remove her so we can properly prepare for the arrival of the Apex Ventures CEO. Mr. Sterling did not even acknowledge Marcus. He did not look at him. He physically shoved Marcus out of his path, nearly knocking my arrogant husband into a waiter, carrying a silver tray of drinks. Mr. Sterling stopped exactly 3 feet in front of me. He pulled a white linen handkerchief from his pocket and dabbed the heavy sweat from his forehead. He straightened his posture, clasped his hands in front of him, and lowered his head in a deep, respectful bow. "Ms. Maya," Mr. Sterling said, his voice trembling with sheer reverence and sheer terror. "It is an absolute honor to finally welcome you in person. Thank you for keeping me on the transitional board of directors. We have prepared the main table exactly to your specifications. Please let me escort you to your seat." The jazz band playing on the grand stage seemed to fade into nothingness. The clinking of crystal glasses ceased entirely. The entire VIP section of the ballroom fell into a dead, suffocating silence. Hundreds of the most powerful corporate elites in Manhattan were watching the CEO of a massive financial firm bow to the woman my husband had just called a low-level administrative worker. I turned my gaze slowly toward Marcus. The color had drained completely from his face, leaving him looking like a hollow, terrified ghost. His mouth hung open. His eyes darted wildly between Mr. Sterling bowing in front of me, the heavy security guards flanking my sides, and the undeniable authority radiating from my posture. I could actually see his brain short-circuiting in real time. He was frantically trying to connect the image of the boring, quiet woman he had banished to a motel on Christmas Eve with the ruthless billionaire predator who had just liquidated his entire industry. He remembered the startup ideas he had laughed at 5 years ago. He remembered my quiet late nights working on my laptop while he slept. He remembered the red breaking news ticker flashing across the television screen at the airport. The puzzle pieces violently snapped together in his mind. The devastating realization hit him with the force of a freight train. His legs gave out slightly, and he had to grab the edge of a cocktail table just to keep himself from collapsing onto the floor. He tried to speak. He tried to form a single word, but his throat just clicked uselessly. He was utterly paralyzed by his own monumental stupidity. Suddenly, the heavy silence of the crowd was broken by a loud, obnoxious slur. Connor pushed his way through the gathered executives. My white brother-in-law was sweating through his designer suit, his face flushed red from the excessive amount of whiskey he had consumed to numb his audit-induced panic. He stumbled slightly, gripping his glass, completely oblivious to the shifting power dynamic in the room. He glared at Mr. Sterling, then pointed a sloppy finger in my direction. Sterling Connor slurred loudly, his voice echoing in the quiet ballroom. "Why the hell are you bowing to my broke sister-in-law?" I turned my head slowly to look at Connor. The security guards stepped forward, ready to intercept him, but I raised a single finger to hold them back. I took one deliberate step closer to Connor, letting my calm, predatory smile return to my lips. "Connor," I said, my voice echoing with absolute authority across the silent room. "I believe you have an indictment to prepare for." The color drained from Connor's flushed face. The glass in his hand trembled violently, amber liquid sloshing over the rim onto his expensive shoes. His arrogant, untouchable smirk shattered into a mask of pure panic. He opened his mouth to speak, to demand an explanation, to hurl another insult, but his vocal cords entirely failed him. He simply stared at me, his eyes wide and bloodshot as the crushing reality of my words paralyzed his nervous system. Before anyone could utter another sound, a sharp melodic chime echoed through the grand ballroom. The master of ceremonies was tapping a silver spoon against a crystal champagne flute, signaling that it was time for the evening keynote address. Mr. Sterling, who was standing nearby looking like a man who had narrowly escaped a firing squad, scrambled toward the main stage. He moved with a frantic energy, straightening his expensive silk tie and wiping a thick layer of cold sweat from his forehead. The live jazz band abruptly stopped playing, and the sophisticated hum of hundreds of wealthy, influential guests faded into an expectant, heavy silence. I did not spare another glance at my terrified husband or his equally horrified brother-in-law. I simply turned my back on them, lifting my chin, and faced the grand stage with absolute composure. Mr. Sterling gripped the microphone stand with both of his shaking hands. His voice echoed through the massive surround sound speakers, carrying a nervous quiver that he desperately tried to mask with fake corporate enthusiasm. He formally welcomed the elite crowd to the prestigious New Year Eve gala and thanked them profusely for their continued dedication to Sterling Financials. Then he took a deep, shuddering breath, gripping the microphone even tighter. He announced that tonight marked a historic, unprecedented turning point for their firm. He spoke passionately about a visionary leader, a brilliant and ruthless venture capitalist who had recently acquired their entire operation through the shadow holding company known as Apex Ventures. He praised this mysterious corporate savior for her unparalleled business acumen and her unwavering commitment to restoring absolute integrity to their failing corporate structure. Marcus stood completely frozen in the center of the grand ballroom. I could physically feel his eyes burning into the back of my custom emerald gown. He was trapped in a waking, inescapable nightmare, forced to stand in total silence and listen to his own chief executive officer publicly worship the very same woman he had banished to the freezing rain-slicked streets of New York on Christmas Eve. Mr. Sterling raised his voice, gesturing wildly toward the center of the ballroom where I stood. He officially introduced the visionary founder and chief executive officer of Apex Holdings, instructing the massive crowd to give a resounding, thunderous welcome to Maya. The applause that erupted was absolutely deafening. Hundreds of Manhattan elite industry titans and powerful private investors broke into enthusiastic cheers, turning their bodies in unison to face me. The bright spotlight swung rapidly across the dark vaulted ceiling and slammed directly onto my emerald silk dress, illuminating me like a flawless, priceless diamond in the exact center of the room. I began my walk toward the main stage. I moved with slow, deliberate, unbothered grace, my head held high, acknowledging the clapping crowd with a slight, confident nod. The sea of wealthy executives parted automatically, stepping back respectfully to create a wide, clear path for me to ascend the velvet-lined stairs. As I reached the top of the elevated platform and took my rightful place behind the polished acrylic podium, I looked down at the center of the ballroom floor. The bright spotlight had left them behind in the shadows, but I could see them perfectly. Marcus was standing exactly where I had left him, his broad shoulders slumped in absolute defeat, his chest heaving as he struggled to draw a single steady breath. Chloe stood 2 feet away from him, her arms crossed defensively, looking thoroughly confused and increasingly angry as she slowly realized the man she was clinging to was not the powerful titan he claimed to be. Connor was leaning heavily against a tall cocktail table, just to keep his trembling legs upright, clutching his chest as if he were experiencing a massive cardiac event. And standing right next to him was Nia. Marcus's sister had just arrived at the gala, wearing a flashy designer gown, totally unaware of the nuclear bomb that had just detonated. She was staring up at me on the stage, her mouth hanging wide open in utter disbelief, violently shaking her husband's arm to ask why the woman she relentlessly despised was receiving a standing ovation from billionaires. I smiled warmly at the crowd, letting the thunderous applause die down completely before leaning my face close to the microphone. I thanked Mr. Sterling for his highly gracious introduction. My voice rang out clear, smooth, and laced with an undeniable heavy authority. I told the captivated audience that acquiring Sterling Financials was not just a simple business transaction for me. I explained that it was a deeply personal mission to clean house from the top down. I delivered a masterful, razor-sharp speech about intense corporate accountability. I spoke passionately about trimming the dead weight from bloated, useless departments and brutally eliminating the corporate parasites who drained vital resources while contributing absolutely no value. I emphasized that a successful, lasting empire could never be built on a crumbling foundation of lies, deception, and stolen funds. Every single word was a perfectly calculated double entendre aimed directly at Marcus and Connor. I let my steady gaze sweep over the silent room before locking eyes with my trembling husband. He knew exactly what was coming. As my first act as CEO, I announced, my voice echoing off the crystal chandeliers. I have decided to restructure our executive leadership team effectively immediately. Marcus, Connor, please step up to the stage. I have a special presentation for you both tonight. The silence in the grand ballroom was absolute. Hundreds of eyes shifted from my position at the podium down to the two men standing frozen on the main floor. The spotlight operator widened the beam to illuminate Marcus and Connor in a harsh glare. For a fleeting second, neither of them moved. They were rooted to the plush carpet, entirely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of their impending public humiliation. Then Marcus took a sudden, jerky step forward. He was a survivor, a corporate chameleon who had spent his entire career manipulating situations to his advantage. He adjusted his silk lapels plastered on his signature charismatic smile and began the long walk toward the stage. It was a pathetic display of fake confidence. He puffed his chest, nodding to bewildered executives as he passed their tables, trying to project the image of a man in on the joke. He wanted the room to believe this was simply a playful dynamic between a power couple. Connor, however, could not pull off the same illusion. My white brother-in-law looked like a man walking to the gallows. He stumbled twice on his way to the velvet-lined stairs, his complexion a sickly shade of gray. The alcohol he had consumed earlier was visibly catching up to him, and he gripped the brass handrail for dear life as he hauled himself upward. Every step they took echoed through the silent room. I watched them ascend, my expression perfectly composed. I did not glare. I did not smirk. I stood behind the acrylic podium with the serene grace of an executioner. When they finally reached the center of the stage, they stood shoulder to shoulder facing the crowd. Marcus turned his head slightly toward me, maintaining his fake smile for the audience while whispering through gritted teeth, begging me to stop this and promising we could talk about everything at home. I completely ignored his desperate whisper. I reached under the podium and picked up two thick, premium black envelopes, sealed with the Apex Ventures corporate crest in gold wax. I stepped out from behind the podium, carrying the envelopes in one hand and the wireless microphone in the other. I stopped directly in front of them. The height of my heels put me exactly at eye level with Marcus. His practiced smile began to quiver at the edges as he stared into my eyes, searching for any trace of the obedient, quiet wife he had left out in the cold. He found absolutely nothing. I raised the microphone to my lips, letting my voice carry across the cavernous room. At Apex Ventures, I announced smoothly, we believe in recognizing the true contributions of our leadership team. We believe that loyalty, transparency, and hard work should never go unnoticed. Therefore, I felt it was only fitting to present our Vice President of Regional Accounts and our leading real estate partner with a special bonus reflecting their years of service. I held out the first black envelope to Marcus. He hesitated, his hands trembling slightly before taking it. I handed the second envelope to Connor, who snatched it with a sweaty, uncoordinated grip. "Open them," I commanded gently into the microphone. "Let everyone see the reward you have earned." Marcus fumbled with the gold wax seal. He was trying so hard to keep his composure, trying to maintain the facade that he was a vital, respected executive, receiving a prestigious award. He pulled out a thick stack of high-gloss paper. It was not a bonus check. The very first page was a formal termination letter printed on Apex Ventures letterhead, citing gross misconduct, fraud, and violation of company morals. But the termination letter was only the cover page. Behind it was a carefully curated high-definition photo gallery printed in full color. I watched Marcus flip to the second page. His breath hitched audibly. It was a crystal-clear surveillance photograph of him and Chloe entering a luxury boutique hotel in Soho at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday. He flipped to the next page, his hands shaking violently now. Another photo, this one showing him purchasing a diamond necklace for his mistress using a corporate credit card. Subsequent pages contained financial logs showing exactly how much money he had siphoned to fund his secret life. The beautiful illusion shattered instantly. The charming smile melted off his face, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated horror. He looked up at me, his eyes wide and pleading, realizing that I had known everything all along. I had known about his mistress, his lies, and his financial deception while I was making him dinner and washing his clothes. Next to him, Connor let out a strangled, pathetic gasp. He had opened his envelope to find something far worse than infidelity photos. Connor was holding a comprehensive 50-page forensic audit report. The front page featured a summary of his dummy vendor accounts, highlighting nearly $2 million in embezzled funds. The report included direct IP addresses, forged wire transfer receipts, and the digital signatures connecting his crimes directly to Marcus. Connor dropped the thick papers. They scattered across the polished stage floor, revealing the evidence of his federal crimes to the front row of executives. He clutched his chest, gasping for air, as a full-blown panic attack seized him. The entire ballroom began to murmur. The hushed whispers swelled into a loud, undeniable wave of shock and disgust as the elite crowd realized they were watching the real-time downfall of two monumental frauds. Marcus tried to reach for my hand, his voice breaking as he sputtered my name completely, forgetting the microphone was still picking up sound. I took one single deliberate step back, ensuring a wide, untouchable distance between us. The contrast between my radiant, emerald-clad composure and his sweaty, terrified ruin was the perfect final image for the audience. I lifted the microphone one last time. My voice sliced through the rising noise of the crowd, cold and absolute. "Security!" I said, the command echoing through the massive ballroom. "Please escort these former employees off my property immediately. They are trespassing." The two massive security guards who had been flanking the stage immediately stepped forward at my command. The heavy thud of their boots on the polished wood floor seemed to finally snap Marcus out of his paralyzed trance. As the guards reached out to grab his arms, his legs completely gave way. My arrogant image-obsessed husband dropped heavily onto his knees right there in the center of the grand stage. The man who had spent the last 5 years telling me I was unsophisticated, the man who had banished me to the freezing streets of New York to protect his corporate image, was now crawling toward the edge of the podium. He clasped his hands together in a frantic praying motion. Tears were streaming down his face, ruining his perfectly groomed appearance. He grabbed the hem of my emerald gown, his voice cracking as he begged me to stop the security guards. He pleaded into the dead silence of the ballroom, swearing that the photos were taken completely out of context. He sobbed that it was all a terrible misunderstanding, that the pressure of the corporate world had clouded his judgment, and that he truly loved me. He promised he would spend the rest of his life making it up to me if I just gave him one more chance to explain. A collective gasp of absolute disgust rippled through the hundreds of executives watching from the floor. Industry titans who had been shaking his hand and laughing at his jokes just 20 minutes ago were now looking at him like he was a diseased rat. The second-hand embarrassment in the room was palpable. But the most violent reaction did not come from the crowd. It came from Chloe. His beautiful young mistress had been standing frozen near the edge of the stage, her mind racing as she processed the termination letter and the forensic audit report projected on the massive screens behind us. The reality of the situation crashed down on her. The wealthy, powerful vice president she had been sleeping with was actually an unemployed, disgraced fraud who had just been publicly annihilated by his own billionaire wife. Marcus, desperate for any lifeline, turned his tear-streaked face toward her. He reached his shaking hand out across the stage, silently pleading for her to support him, to validate the lies he had told. Chloe recoiled violently. She slapped his hand away as if his touch physically burned her. "Do not touch me," she screamed, her voice shrill and echoing off the crystal chandeliers. "You pathetic liar. You told me you were already divorced. You told me you owned that brownstone and that you were the youngest partner in the firm. I wasted a year of my life on a broke, unemployed loser who steals from his own company." Marcus reached for her again, sputtering apologies and promising he still had money stashed away. Chloe did not hesitate. She raised the crystal flute of champagne she had been holding all evening and threw the entire contents directly into his face. The expensive vintage splashed across his eyes and soaked the collar of his dry, clean tuxedo. Without another word, she hiked up the skirt of her plunging crimson dress, turned on her designer heels, and stormed out of the grand ballroom. She pushed past the staring executives, leaving Marcus kneeling in a puddle of spilled champagne and his own shattered ego. As Marcus collapsed forward, sobbing into his hands, Connor suddenly decided it was his moment to reclaim the narrative. My white brother-in-law, dripping with the unearned confidence and sheer delusion that had carried him through his mediocre life, puffed out his chest. He shoved one of the security guards aside and marched to the edge of the platform. His face was beet red, a combination of the whiskey he had consumed and the blinding rage of a man who was not used to being held accountable. He pointed a thick, trembling finger directly at my face. He shouted that I was completely out of my mind if I thought I could get away with this. He claimed the audit was a fabrication and a desperate, bitter attempt by a jealous woman to ruin his promising real estate career. He puffed his chest out even further, attempting to look physically intimidating, and threatened to sue Apex Ventures and me personally for defamation. He puffed up and loudly declared that his family lawyers were the most ruthless legal team on the East Coast and that they would destroy me by Monday morning. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I pulled the microphone close to my lips and smiled a cold, razor-sharp smile. "Your family lawyers dropped you 20 minutes ago, Connor," I announced smoothly, my voice ringing out with absolute chilling clarity. "They sent a formal withdrawal of representation to my legal counsel the moment I forwarded them the undeniable federal wire fraud evidence. They know a sinking ship when they see one." Connor froze. The arrogant bluster vanished from his posture, instantly replaced by a hollow, sickening realization that he was completely and utterly defenseless. The security guards did not give him a chance to recover. They grabbed Connor by the shoulders and roughly hauled him backward. Two more guards stepped onto the stage and hauled Marcus up by his armpits, dragging my sobbing husband away from the podium. As they were being forcefully marched toward the service exit, Nia suddenly broke through the crowd. Marcus' sister ran up to the edge of the stage, tears streaming down her face, her designer gown tangling around her ankles. She looked up at me, her hands clasped together in desperate prayer. "Maya, please," Nia cried out, her voice cracking with pure panic. "You cannot do this to us. Connor is going to go to federal prison. We are going to lose our house. Please show some mercy. We are family." I looked down at the woman who had mocked my education, dismissed my career, and told me to hide in a cheap motel on Christmas Eve, just so her brother could secure a fraudulent promotion. I did not feel an ounce of pity. I leaned into the microphone one last time. "Try Uber, Nia," I said, my voice echoing through the silent ballroom. "I hear they are running a holiday discount." The brutal reality of Saturday morning broke over Manhattan with a bitter, biting cold that seemed specifically designed to punish the wicked. For Marcus, the harsh light of day brought a reality far more terrifying than the nightmare he had lived on the grand stage of the Plaza Hotel. He had spent the night shivering on a lumpy mattress in a budget motel in Queens. After being forcefully ejected from the gala, he had taken a desperate cab ride to Chloe's luxury apartment in Soho, fully expecting his mistress to let him inside so he could regroup and figure out a survival strategy. Instead, the building concierge had handed him a plastic trash bag containing his spare toothbrush and a handwritten note from Chloe instructing him to lose her number. Marcus woke up with a pounding headache, still wearing the champagne-soaked tuxedo that smelled of cheap motel soap and profound failure. He stared at the water-stained ceiling, his mind racing through his limited options. He needed capital. He needed the expensive watches he kept in his closet, the emergency cash hidden in his desk, and the designer suits he could potentially sell. He reasoned that no matter how angry I was, the luxury brownstone was still his legal residence. Half of everything inside that multi-million-dollar property belonged to him by right of marriage. He gathered whatever shred of his shattered arrogance remained, hailed a grimy yellow cab, and directed the driver to our address. He stepped out onto the familiar, pristine sidewalk of our neighborhood. The winter wind whipped his ruined tuxedo jacket around his waist. He marched up the front steps of the brownstone, determined to assert his marital rights, pack his valuables, and hire a divorce lawyer who could force a massive settlement out of my deep pockets. He pulled his house key from his pocket and shoved it into the brass lock. The key did not turn. Marcus frowned, jiggling the metal and shoving his shoulder against the heavy mahogany door. The lock mechanism refused to yield. He pulled the key out, wiped it on his sleeve, and tried again with a frustrated grunt. Before he could start pounding his fists against the wood, the heavy door clicked and swung open smoothly. I was not the one standing in the doorway. Valerie stepped out onto the porch. My lead corporate counsel was wearing a tailored charcoal overcoat, holding a steaming cup of coffee in one hand and a thick manila folder in the other. Flanking her on either side were two massive, unsmiling security guards whose sheer physical presence made Marcus take an involuntary step backward down the stairs. Valerie took a slow sip of her coffee, looking down at Marcus with an expression of pure, unadulterated pity. She noted his wrinkled, stained tuxedo and his bloodshot eyes. Marcus demanded to be let inside immediately. He raised his voice, shouting that Valerie had absolutely no right to lock him out of his own house. He claimed he was going to call the police and have her arrested for illegal eviction, insisting that the brownstone was marital property and he was legally entitled to half of its entire value. Valerie let out a sharp, genuine laugh that echoed down the quiet, affluent street. She opened the manila folder and pulled out a single sheet of watermarked paper, holding it up for Marcus to read. She explained very slowly, as if she were speaking to a particularly slow child, that the brownstone was not and had never been marital property. Valerie informed him that the property had been purchased in its entirety by an anonymous holding company called Emerald Holdings LLC, exactly 2 years before Marcus and I even got married. She then revealed that Emerald Holdings LLC was a subsidiary of Apex Ventures, which meant I was the sole and exclusive owner of the building. Marcus stared at the deed in Valerie's hand. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He did not own the walls, he did not own the floors. He was legally nothing more than a tenant. Valerie smiled coldly. She informed him that because he had engaged in documented federal wire fraud and used the premises to conduct illegal activities, his tenancy had been officially and lawfully terminated effective at midnight. His personal belongings, minus anything purchased with marital funds, had already been packed into 3 cardboard boxes and shipped to his mother's small house in New Jersey. Desperation clawed its way up his throat. Marcus realized the physical assets were gone. He needed liquid cash to hire a criminal defense attorney before the federal authorities inevitably came knocking on his door. He pulled his smartphone from his pocket with trembling fingers, rapidly opening his mobile banking application. He figured he could quickly transfer whatever remained in his personal checking accounts to a burner account before my lawyers found them. He stared at his phone screen. His personal checking account showed a balance of exactly $0. His savings account showed 0. Even his emergency credit cards had been completely deactivated. Marcus looked up at Valerie, his voice cracking, as he asked what she had done to his money. Valerie took another sip of her coffee. She explained that his accounts were completely frozen pending a mandatory forensic divorce audit. She detailed how Marcus had foolishly and illegally commingled his personal funds, our joint marital funds, and the money he had embezzled with Connor to pay for his mistress's luxury lifestyle. Because the funds were tangled in a web of federal wire fraud and marital dissipation of assets, a federal judge had signed an emergency order locking down every single penny attached to his name. He was completely broke. Marcus stood on the sidewalk, the cold seeping into his bones. He had no home, no job, no money, and no mistress. His chest heaved as he tried to process the absolute devastating totality of his ruin. He turned his head slowly, looking for any possible escape, any lifeline he could cling to. His eyes landed on his luxury sports car parked halfway down the block. The sleek black vehicle was his pride and joy, the ultimate symbol of the corporate success he had faked for so long. He figured he could at least sleep in the car and drive to a pawn shop to sell the custom rims for cash. Suddenly, a loud, piercing notification tone erupted from his phone. Marcus looked down at the screen. It was an automated alert from his automotive lending company. The text read that a repossession order had been executed due to severe delinquency on his account. Marcus whipped his head back toward the street. A massive, heavy-duty tow truck had already backed up to his sports car. A worker in a neon vest was securing thick metal chains around the front axles, preparing to haul the vehicle away. Marcus lunged forward, shouting for the driver to stop, but the roar of the tow truck engine completely drowned out his desperate, pathetic cries. Valerie leaned against the heavy mahogany doorframe, watching the luxury car lift off the pavement. She offered Marcus one final razor-sharp smile. "You missed 3 payments, Marcus," Valerie said smoothly. "Should have planned better." Marcus stood on the freezing pavement, watching the tow truck haul away the remaining symbol of his fake success. With his bank accounts frozen and pockets empty, he endured a humiliating subway ride out to the affluent suburbs of Westchester. He trudged through the icy slush toward the sprawling, heavily mortgaged estate belonging to his sister Nia and her husband Connor. He expected to find a safe haven to strategize a defense. Instead, he walked right into a chaotic, screaming war zone. Marcus pushed open the unlocked front door and stepped into the grand foyer. The air inside the house was thick with the acrid smell of burning plastic and overheated machinery. He followed the noise into Connor's home office. The room looked like the epicenter of a frantic, panicked disaster. Connor was sweating profusely, his tie discarded and his designer shirt unbuttoned. He was frantically shoving stacks of financial ledgers and printed wire transfers into a heavy-duty industrial paper shredder. The machine was whining and smoking from the intense, desperate abuse. Nia was pacing back and forth across the hardwood floor, her eyes swollen and red from hours of crying. When she saw Marcus standing in the doorway, her sorrow instantly transformed into blind, vicious rage. Nia lunged toward her brother, grabbing the lapels of his ruined champagne-stained tuxedo. She screamed at him, her voice cracking with pure hysteria. She blamed Marcus entirely, shouting that he brought a ruthless, vindictive woman like Maya into their perfect family. Nia claimed that Marcus had destroyed her husband, promising real estate career by dragging him into a petty marital dispute. She cried that her high society friends were already blocking her phone number and that she would be completely ruined in the local country club circuit. Marcus grabbed his sister's wrists and roughly shoved her hands away. His own desperation finally boiled over into explosive anger. He glared at Nia and then turned his furious gaze toward Connor, who was still desperately feeding documents into the smoking shredder. Marcus shouted that he did not ruin anyone. He pointed a shaking finger at Connor and exposed the ugly, pathetic truth right there in the home office. He screamed that Connor was a massive fraud whose real estate business was entirely underwater long before the audit. Marcus revealed that Connor was the one who relentlessly peer-pressured him into hiding the embezzlement. Connor had manipulated his position as the white son-in-law, using his unearned confidence to convince Marcus that the compliance checks were just minor formalities that real power players ignored. Marcus yelled that he had risked his own freedom just to bail out a mediocre developer who did not have the actual talent to survive in the Manhattan real estate market. Connor stopped shredding and spun around, his face flushed with whiskey and rage. He fired back, insulting Marcus' intelligence. Connor yelled that Marcus was nothing but a greedy middle manager who was too busy buying diamond necklaces for his cheap mistress to notice his own wife buying out his entire corporate industry. They stood inches apart, hurling vicious, career-ending insults at each other, the fragile illusion of their perfect family bond completely shattering under the immense pressure of their impending federal indictments. The screaming match was suddenly interrupted by the sharp click of high heels in the hallway. Beatrice Vance, the matriarch of the family, stepped into the office. My former mother-in-law had always carried herself like royalty. She was the woman who had spent the last 5 years treating me like a peasant, constantly reminding me that her golden boy son and her wealthy white son-in-law were the absolute pinnacle of success. She had always demanded that I quietly serve their ambitions. But as Beatrice stood in the doorway, taking in the sight of the smoking paper shredder, her sobbing daughter, and the two disgraced felons screaming at each other, her regal posture entirely collapsed. The heavy, suffocating weight of disappointment settled over her features. She realized in an agonizing instant that her elite family was a fragile house of cards built on stolen money and deceit. Her legacy was completely destroyed. The sons she bragged about at her elite social gatherings were about to be splashed across the front pages of every financial newspaper as common criminals. Beatrice pressed a trembling hand to her chest. She looked at Marcus, her eyes filled with tears of deep shame. She whispered that they were going to lose everything, banished from their prestigious circles and facing years in federal prison. But Beatrice was a survivor who had spent her entire life manipulating situations to her advantage. Her eyes hardened with sudden, desperate determination. She reached into her designer handbag and pulled out her smartphone. She announced that there was only one way to fix this disaster. She was going to call me. She truly believed she could use the sacred family card, that she could leverage her position as an elder to demand respect, play on my sympathies, and beg for a quiet, merciful settlement to save her golden boy. Marcus and Nia watched in tense silence as Beatrice dialed my number and put the phone on speaker. The dial tone echoed loudly in the tense smoking room. I was sitting in a sunlit private dining room in a high-end Manhattan restaurant when my phone lit up with her name. I took a sip of my freshly squeezed orange juice, smiled, and answered the call. Beatrice immediately launched into a frantic plea. She cried out my name, begging me to remember that we were family, and pleading for a chance to sit down and talk before anyone else got hurt. I did not raise my voice. I let a moment of cool, absolute silence pass before I responded. "I am sorry, Beatrice," I said smoothly, cutting off her desperate sobs. "I am currently having brunch with the district attorney. Can I take a message?" The crisp Monday morning air felt electric as I walked through the towering glass doors of Sterling Financials. I did not take the standard employee elevators. I bypassed the crowded lobby and stepped directly into the executive lift, using my new master access card. When the polished steel doors parted on the top floor, the atmosphere was entirely different than the chaotic panic of the previous week. It was deadly quiet. I walked straight past the nervous receptionists and into the massive corner office that Mr. Sterling had hurriedly vacated and prepared for me over the weekend. I sat behind the sprawling mahogany desk, placed my hands on the cool leather surface, and breathed in the scent of absolute victory. My first order of business was to completely dismantle the toxic boys' club that Marcus and Connor had spent years building. I pulled up the human resources files and began my corporate cleansing. For years, I had listened to Marcus brag about taking credit for brilliant financial models and marketing strategies. I knew exactly who had actually done the grueling work, while my ex-husband played golf and drank expensive scotch. I immediately summoned 5 senior analysts to my office. They were all brilliant, hard-working black and brown women who had been repeatedly passed over for promotions because they did not fit into Connor and Marcus' elite privileged networking circles. When they stood nervously before my desk, expecting to be liquidated in the merger, I handed them their new vice president contracts. I doubled their salaries on the spot and gave them full authority over the regional accounts division. The shock and tears of gratitude in their eyes validated every single calculated move I had made. Word of my ruthless restructuring spread through the corporate floors like wildfire. Within an hour, my calendar was flooded with requests for brief meetings from the mid-level managers and directors who used to mock me. These were the exact same men who used to attend Marcus' lavish dinner parties, the ones who would laugh loudly at his condescending jokes about my boring remote administrative job. They were the ones who had enabled his affair with Chloe covering for him when he skipped out on afternoon meetings to take his mistress to luxury hotels. Now they were lined up outside my office, practically tripping over themselves to grovel. I called them in one by one. A senior director named Greg, who had once loudly told a table of executives that Marcus needed a wife with more high society pedigree, sat across from me, sweating through his expensive shirt. He smiled a nervous, pathetic smile and tried to compliment my visionary leadership, claiming he had always known I was destined for greatness. I did not smile back. I pulled out a meticulously compiled folder containing emails and expense reports, showing how Greg had helped Marcus forge travel documents to cover up his stolen funds. I slid the folder across the desk. I told Greg that I valued loyalty and transparency above all else, and because he clearly lacked both, his services were no longer required. I fired him and 4 other toxic managers just like him before my morning coffee had even gone cold. I systematically ripped out the roots of the misogynistic, corrupt culture Marcus had cultivated, replacing it with a meritocracy that rewarded actual talent instead of slick, empty charisma. Just before noon, a soft knock sounded at my heavy mahogany door. Mr. Sterling walked in looking like a hollow shell of the domineering corporate leader he used to be. He did not sit down until I explicitly offered him a chair. The man who used to dictate my husband's schedule, the man who was supposed to sleep in my bed on Christmas Eve while I froze outside an airport, now sat before me with his hands clasped nervously in his lap. He looked at me with deep, profound regret. He offered a raw, unfiltered apology for his profound blindness. He admitted that he had been completely taken in by Marcus' smooth-talking charm and Connor unearned white-collar confidence. He confessed that he had allowed their flashy suits and country club memberships to cloud his judgment, ignoring the glaring red flags in their quarterly reports because they played the corporate game so well. Mr. Sterling lowered his head, his voice heavy with shame, and told me he had fundamentally failed the company by promoting men who were completely devoid of integrity, while ignoring the brilliant minds actually sustaining the firm. I let him speak his piece. When he finished, I looked him dead in the eye and told him that apologies were meaningless without action. I informed him that I was keeping him on the board strictly to handle the public relations fallout, but that the culture of his firm was changing permanently today. He nodded vigorously, agreeing to every single term I laid out without a single word of protest. He knew he was incredibly lucky I was not handing him over to the federal authorities alongside Connor. As Mr. Sterling quietly excused himself from my office, my newly promoted executive assistant stepped through the doorway. Her name was Sarah, one of the brilliant women Marcus had relentlessly suppressed. She stood tall, holding a sleek digital tablet, but there was a distinct look of urgent concern flashing across her face. She closed the heavy mahogany door securely behind her to ensure absolute privacy before walking briskly up to my desk. She leaned in close, lowering her voice into a tight professional whisper. She informed me that we had a severe security situation developing downstairs in the main lobby. My stomach tightened, anticipating the worst. Sarah took a quick breath and told me that Marcus had managed to bypass the outer perimeter guards. He was currently standing in the center of the corporate lobby, looking completely unhinged and refusing to leave the premises until he spoke directly to me. I raised an eyebrow, fully prepared to instruct her to call the police and have him arrested for criminal trespassing. But before I could give the order, Sarah added a piece of information that made the blood freeze in my veins. She warned me that he was not just begging for his job back. She said Marcus was screaming at the security guards, claiming he had acquired highly classified leverage against me, and he was threatening to expose a devastating secret to the financial press if I did not come down to face him immediately. I stood up from my heavy mahogany desk and smoothed the front of my tailored blazer. I did not let panic show on my face, even though Sarah looked absolutely terrified. I told my assistant to call the head of corporate security and have a full detail meet me at the private elevator banks on the ground floor. I was not going to hide in my corner office while my disgraced soon-to-be ex-husband threw a public temper tantrum in my building. I was going to handle this situation the same way I handled every other corporate parasite who tried to threaten my empire. I stepped into the executive elevator and watched the floor numbers tick down, taking a slow, calming breath to prepare for the inevitable performance Marcus was about to put on. When the polished steel doors parted on the ground floor, I stepped into the sprawling, glass-walled lobby of Sterling Financials. The atmosphere was incredibly tense, filled with the nervous whispers of employees who had just witnessed a corporate bloodbath. 4 massive security guards immediately fell into step behind me, forming a solid, intimidating protective wall. I walked past the reception desk and spotted Marcus standing near the center fountain. The sight of him was almost jarring, a complete and total departure from the polished executive I once knew. This was a man who used to spend 3 hours every Sunday meticulously ironing his designer shirts and polishing his Italian leather shoes. The man standing before me now was a pathetic, disheveled mess. His expensive suit jacket was severely wrinkled and stained with spilled champagne. His tie was completely missing, and dark, heavy bags hung under his bloodshot eyes. He looked exactly like a man who had not slept for days, who was entirely broken by the sheer weight of his monumental failure. It was a truly spectacular downfall to witness. When Marcus saw me approaching with my security detail, he immediately puffed out his chest, trying desperately to summon the arrogant, domineering energy he used to weaponize against me in our living room. He pointed a shaking finger at my face and raised his voice, ensuring that the few employees lingering in the lobby could hear his desperate accusations. He shouted that he knew exactly how I had managed to acquire Sterling Financials. He claimed he had spent the entire weekend digging through my old home office files and reviewing public acquisition records. Marcus boldly declared that there was absolutely no way a quiet remote administrative worker could build a multi-billion-dollar venture capital firm legally. He accused me of orchestrating a massive systematic insider trading ring, claiming I had illegally used his corporate connections and private firm data to manipulate the market and buy out his industry. He took a step forward, but my security guards immediately blocked his path, forcing him to halt. Marcus sneered, leaning around the guards to deliver his ultimate threat. He lowered his voice into a vicious, calculated tone and told me that he had already drafted an email to the top financial journalists at 3 major news networks. He promised that he would hit send and completely destroy my reputation, spark a federal investigation into Apex Ventures, and ruin my entire life, unless I met his demands. He demanded a quiet, uncontested divorce settlement of exactly $50 million, full ownership of the Manhattan brownstone, and a public statement clearing his name of all embezzlement charges. He truly believed he held the winning hand. I stood perfectly still, letting his ridiculous, desperate threats echo through the cavernous glass lobby. I looked at his bloodshot eyes, his trembling hands, and his pathetic attempt at extortion. Then I did something that completely shattered his remaining confidence. I laughed. It was not a nervous giggle or a defensive scoff. It was a loud, genuine, resounding laugh that bounced off the marble walls and made the security guards smirk. Marcus reeled back, his face twisting in profound confusion as his ultimate blackmail attempt was met with pure, unfiltered amusement. I snapped my fingers, and Valerie stepped out from behind the security detail. My lead corporate counsel had been waiting in the wings holding a thick leather folder. She handed the folder directly to me. I pulled out a legally binding cease and desist letter, an ironclad non-disclosure agreement, and a stack of uncontested divorce papers. I walked right up to the security line and tossed the documents onto the low glass coffee table separating us. I looked Marcus dead in the eye and told him to go ahead and call the press. I encouraged him to invite the federal investigators to look into my flawless, entirely legal investment history. But I added smoothly, if he decided to make that phone call, I would immediately release the secondary folder Valerie was currently holding. I explained that my forensic accountants had not just found his mistress' slush fund, they had also uncovered 3 consecutive years of deliberately falsified personal tax returns. I leaned in close, letting my voice drop to a deadly icy register, and informed him that while I might have the patience to watch him humiliate himself, the Internal Revenue Service was much less forgiving than I am. The color vanished completely from his face. The blustering, arrogant corporate titan evaporated, leaving nothing but a terrified, broken coward. He stared down at the documents resting on the glass table as the crushing reality of his defeat finally settled over him. He realized he had no leverage and no future left. He reached into his wrinkled pocket, pulled out a cheap pen, and leaned over the table. His hands shook so violently that he could barely sign his name. He signed the non-disclosure agreement and the uncontested divorce papers, surrendering all asset claims. He dropped the cheap plastic pen, turned his back on the perfect life he had destroyed, and walked out into the freezing rain, utterly and completely defeated. While Marcus was stumbling through the freezing rain without a dime to his name, the federal authorities were closing in on his partner in crime. The sun had barely begun to rise over the wealthy lawns of Westchester County when unmarked black sport utility vehicles silently rolled up to the iron gates of Connor and Naya, massive estate. The heavy gates, which Connor used to brag about at corporate dinners, were swiftly forced open by federal agents. Before the couple woke up, the heavy oak front door of their mansion was violently breached. Connor jolted awake to the terrifying sound of heavy boots pounding up his spiral staircase. He stumbled out of his California king bed wearing expensive silk pajamas just in time to see a dozen agents swarming his second-floor hallway. They did not offer pleasantries. They flashed federal badges and immediately presented a stack of warrants authorized by a federal judge targeting his fraudulent real estate company and every asset tied to his name. Panic consumed Connor entirely. The arrogant white-collar confidence he had used to belittle me on Christmas Eve evaporated. He stood trembling in his hallway, watching helplessly as forensic investigators dismantled his luxurious life. Agents marched through the house, unplugging his computers, seizing his encrypted hard drives, and boxing up the financial ledgers he had failed to shred. Outside tow trucks were hooking up his imported sports cars and hauling them away. Nia rushed out of the master suite, clutching a silk robe tightly around her waist. She screamed hysterically, demanding to know what was happening and threatening to call the police on the agents raiding her closet. She watched in absolute horror as a female agent meticulously cataloged her diamond jewelry, her collection of designer handbags, and the expensive watches Marcus funded with stolen money. They were stripping her of everything she used to define her social status. Connor was shoved against the hallway wall and placed in heavy steel handcuffs. The cold metal clicking around his wrists finally broke whatever pathetic resolve he had left. He began to hyperventilate, sweating profusely through his silk pajamas. He looked at the lead federal agent and started talking, desperate to cut a deal right there in the hallway. He did not ask for a lawyer. He did not try to defend his wife. He threw Nia under the bus with breathtaking speed. Connor stammered uncontrollably, claiming he was not the mastermind behind the massive embezzlement scheme. He pointed his cuffed hands directly at Nia, who was standing just a few feet away, completely paralyzed by shock. Connor insisted that his wife had relentlessly pressured him into funding an impossibly lavish lifestyle. He told the agents that Nia had demanded the luxury cars, the country club memberships, and the designer clothes, threatening to leave him if he did not provide the wealth she felt entitled to. He cowardly claimed he only stole the money because she forced his hand. Nia stood frozen, her perfectly manicured hands covering her mouth as she listened to her husband desperately try to pin his federal crimes on her. The illusion of her perfect wealthy marriage shattered into irreparable pieces. The man she had proudly flaunted, the white real estate developer she believed elevated her above women like me, was nothing but a fragile, pathetic fraud, willing to send her to prison just to save his own skin. The agents ignored his pathetic excuses. They confiscated his passport from the bedroom safe, ensuring he could not flee the country, and marched him roughly down the stairs and out the front door. Nia was left standing alone in the center of her ransacked mansion, surrounded by empty spaces where her luxury items used to be. The federal authorities seized the property, locking the doors and giving her exactly 1 hour to pack a suitcase of basic necessities. By that afternoon, the reality of her new life hit Nia with devastating force. Stripped of her bank accounts, her high society status, and her waterfront home, she had nowhere else to go. She took a humiliating train ride back to the city, dragging her single suitcase to her mother. Cramped house, Beatrice. The woman who spent years acting like local royalty was forced to clear out her dusty guest room to accommodate her disgraced daughter. Nia sat on the edge of a twin-sized bed in Beatrice's cramped house, staring at her phone. The elite social circles she once ruled had completely abandoned her. Her country club memberships were instantly revoked. The wealthy friends she gossiped with blocked her number, unwilling to associate with the wife of a convicted embezzler. She had no money, no husband, and absolutely no future. Desperation finally drove her to do the one thing she swore she would never do. She opened her laptop and pulled up my corporate email address. Her hands shook as she typed a message to the woman she had mercilessly bullied for 5 years. She wrote a long, tearful, agonizingly desperate email. She profusely apologized for telling me to hide in a cheap motel on Christmas Eve. She begged for forgiveness, claiming she never truly understood how cruel Marcus and Connor were being. Nia ended the email, pleading for mercy. She asked for a small loan, just enough money so she could hire a defense lawyer to protect herself from the federal charges Connor was trying to pin on her. She promised she would pay me back every cent and publicly apologize. I was sitting at my mahogany desk in the corner office of Apex Ventures when the notification popped up on my screen. I opened the email and read through her frantic, pathetic apologies and desperate pleas for financial salvation. I did not feel an ounce of sympathy. I simply clicked the delete button, erasing her message from my inbox. Forever. I picked up my porcelain teacup, leaned back in my leather chair, and took a slow, satisfying sip of hot tea. Chloe walked into the towering glass atrium of Vanguard Financial with the unearned confidence of a woman who had spent her entire adult life using other people to get ahead. It had been exactly 2 weeks since she threw a glass of champagne in Marcus' face and stormed out of the Plaza Hotel. She had completely cut ties with the disgraced former vice president the moment she realized his bank accounts were frozen. In her mind, she was not a participant in his downfall, but simply another innocent victim of a messy corporate divorce. She fully believed she could just hit the reset button and start climbing a brand new corporate ladder. She wore a tailored crimson skirt suit that hugged her figure perfectly, pairing it with a designer handbag she had purchased using my stolen marital funds. She approached the receptionist with a bright, practiced smile, announcing she was there for her final interview for the Senior Director of Client Relations position. The receptionist offered a polite nod and directed her to the executive conference room on the 60th floor. As Chloe rode the glass elevator up, she mentally rehearsed her charming anecdotes. She planned to bat her eyelashes at the hiring managers, secure a massive starting salary, and find a brand new wealthy executive to fund her luxury lifestyle. She thought the financial district was a massive playground where her beauty and manipulative charm would always guarantee her a seat at the table. She had absolutely no idea that the table she was walking toward had already been flipped over. Chloe pushed open the heavy oak doors of the executive conference room, flashing her most dazzling, brilliant smile. Two older male executives in expensive gray suits were seated on one side of a long, polished mahogany table. But there was a third person sitting between them. Chloe stopped dead in her tracks, her designer heels catching awkwardly on the plush carpet. The bright, dazzling smile instantly vanished from her face, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated panic. Sitting in the center chair reviewing a stack of printed resumes was Valerie. My lead corporate counsel wore a sharp navy blue suit and a predatory, knowing smile. Valerie was not an employee of Vanguard Financial, but as one of the most feared and respected corporate attorneys in Manhattan, she had been hired as a specialized external compliance consultant to oversee their latest executive hiring wave. The financial sector was a surprisingly small world, and Apex Ventures had friends everywhere. Valerie looked up from the paperwork and locked eyes with the terrified mistress standing in the doorway. "Please take a seat, Chloe," Valerie said, her voice smooth and echoing with undeniable authority. "We have been eagerly anticipating your arrival." Chloe swallowed hard, her throat suddenly completely dry. She slowly walked over to the solitary leather chair facing the panel, sitting down stiffly. She tried to look toward the two older male executives, hoping to charm them, but they were both looking at Valerie, waiting for the renowned attorney to lead the evaluation. Valerie picked up Chloe's resume and adjusted her glasses. She began to read the document out loud, dissecting every single line with surgical precision. "It says here, under your previous experience at Sterling Financials, that you spearheaded the regional accounts division and managed high net worth portfolios," Valerie read, maintaining a perfectly flat, professional tone. She looked over the top of the paper at Chloe. "That is a fascinating accomplishment, considering our forensic audit revealed your primary daily activity was utilizing a stolen corporate credit card to purchase designer shoes in Soho while your married boss handled the actual paperwork." Chloe's face flushed a deep, violent shade of crimson. She opened her mouth to protest, to claim that was a lie, but Valerie did not give her a single second to breathe. Valerie moved to the next line on the resume. "You also claim to have specialized skills in corporate synergy and confidential client relations." Valerie continued, dropping the paper onto the mahogany table. "I suppose corporate synergy is one way to describe actively participating in a massive federal wire fraud scheme. Tell me, Chloe, how exactly do you plan to manage confidential client relations for Vanguard Financial when your last public networking event ended with you screaming at an unemployed felon and throwing alcohol across a ballroom full of elite investors?" The two male executives sitting next to Valerie shifted uncomfortably in their expensive chairs. They looked at Chloe with profound, intense disgust. Word of the spectacular, disastrous meltdown at the New Year Eve gala had spread through the Manhattan financial district like wildfire. Every major bank and investment firm knew exactly who Chloe was. She was not viewed as a rising corporate star. She was widely known as a catastrophic walking liability, who associated with embezzlers and brought explosive public drama to elite events. Chloe gripped the armrests of her leather chair, her perfectly manicured nails digging into the material. She tried to defend herself, her voice trembling as she insisted she had absolutely no knowledge of Marcus' illegal activities. She pleaded with the two men, claiming she was a dedicated professional who was simply caught in the crossfire of a bitter divorce settlement. Valerie silenced her with a single raised hand. "Professionalism requires integrity," Valerie stated coldly. "You knowingly engaged in a relationship funded by stolen marital assets, and you stood by a man committing federal crimes until the exact second the money ran out. You do not possess any actual marketable skills when you are not sleeping with a married vice president." Furthermore, given your established proximity to corporate espionage and federal financial crimes, you are a massive security risk to any reputable institution. Valerie turned to the two executives who nodded in immediate firm agreement. "We are concluding this interview," Valerie announced. "You will never work in the financial sector of this city again." Valerie pressed a button on the intercom sitting on the table. Two towering security guards entered the conference room within seconds. Valerie instructed them to escort Chloe out of the building and ensure she was permanently added to the security blacklist. Chloe was forced to stand up, her cheeks burning with hot, humiliating tears of rage and supreme embarrassment. She grabbed her designer handbag and was marched roughly out of the conference room down the glass elevator and physically escorted through the crowded lobby. Dozens of employees stopped to stare as the disgraced woman was paraded out the front doors and pushed onto the freezing concrete sidewalk. The heavy glass doors locked securely behind her. Chloe stood alone on the bustling Manhattan street, shivering in her crimson skirt suit. The harsh reality of her ruined reputation crashed over her. She was completely blacklisted, unhireable, and running out of stolen cash. Desperation seized her chest. Her hands shook violently as she reached into her purse and pulled out her smartphone. Against every single ounce of her pride, she dialed the only person who might possibly understand the magnitude of her total destruction. She dialed Marcus, hoping to find some shred of comfort, or perhaps a miserable companion to share her sudden absolute isolation. She held the phone to her ear, praying he would answer. A cold, automated voice responded instead. "The number you have reached has been disconnected and is no longer in service." Chloe slowly lowered the phone, staring blankly at the busy and different crowds of New York City. The woman who had built her entire life on using other people suddenly realized she had absolutely no one left to use. She was completely and utterly alone. The reason Chloe received a disconnected message was incredibly simple. Marcus could no longer afford to pay his monthly cellular provider. His financial ruin was not just a private, corporate matter. It was a highly publicized social execution. News of his and Connor's spectacular deceit had violently ripped through the elite social networks that once served as the foundation of their arrogant identities. The exclusive Jack and Jill networks, where high society families gathered to boast about their generational wealth and corporate achievements, completely eradicated the Vance family name from their official directories. Within 48 hours, Marcus and Connor became the ultimate corporate pariahs. The elite historically black college and university alumni associations that Marcus used to proudly represent swiftly released public statements, distancing themselves from his actions. His carefully curated reputation, built entirely on fake prestige and stolen money, completely dissolved into thin air. Marcus refused to accept his social capital was depleted. He believed the brotherhood of his prestigious college fraternity would inevitably protect him. He assumed that the men he had partied with in his 20s, the men who were now managing partners and investment bankers, would throw him a lifeline. He walked into an upscale cigar lounge in Midtown Manhattan, spending the absolute last of his hidden emergency cash just to get past the doorman. He spotted a group of his former fraternity brothers sitting around a heavy mahogany table, laughing and smoking expensive cigars. Marcus smoothed down his cheap off-the-rack suit jacket, the only one he had left, and marched confidently over to their table, expecting to be welcomed with open arms and a lucrative job offer. The moment Marcus stepped into their line of sight, the laughter around the table died instantly. The silence was deafening. None of his brothers stood up to greet him. None of them offered him a chair or a glass of bourbon. A prominent managing partner named Julian looked up with an expression of pure, unadulterated disdain. Julian did not lower his voice. He looked Marcus in the eye and told him he had incredible nerve showing his face in public. Julian explained that every major executive on Wall Street knew exactly what Marcus had done. He said that nobody in their right mind was going to touch him with a 10-foot pole. Julian leaned forward and delivered the absolute final blow. He told Marcus that offending the most powerful black female chief executive officer on the East Coast was an immediate, permanent career death sentence. Maya was now a major philanthropic donor to their alumni networks and an absolute force of nature in the corporate world. Julian coldly informed Marcus he was a toxic liability and instructed him to leave before security was called. Marcus stumbled back onto the freezing Manhattan pavement, entirely humiliated. The utter rejection from his own fraternity brothers finally broke his delusion. He had no favors left to pull. His resume, which used to be a golden ticket, was now completely radioactive. For 2 agonizing weeks, Marcus submitted applications for mid-level management positions, then junior analyst roles, and finally entry-level banking jobs. He was rejected by every single financial institution in the state. Desperation forced Marcus to abandon the glittering skyscrapers of the financial district entirely. He was forced to take a grueling, soul-crushing entry-level sales position at a depressing strip mall in a far-out borough. The poetic downgrade from his former life of extreme luxury was absolute. The man who used to wear bespoke Italian suits and drink vintage champagne in private penthouses was now forced to wear a stiff, scratchy polyester uniform shirt. He spent long, miserable days standing under flickering fluorescent lights, trying to sell discounted mobile phone plans and cheap phone cases to indifferent customers who ignored him. His feet ached from standing on the cheap linoleum floor, and his fragile ego was repeatedly battered by a teenage shift manager who constantly yelled at him for missing his daily sales quotas. Marcus spent his designated 15-minute lunch breaks hiding in the dingy, cramped employee break room, sitting on a stained folding chair eating cheap instant noodles. He was completely miserable, trapped in a mundane, punishing existence that mirrored the exact administrative drudgery he used to relentlessly mock me for enduring. He had nothing to look forward to except the crushing weight of his mounting debt and the impending legal consequences of his federal crimes. One Tuesday afternoon, while Marcus sat at a scratched folding table making humiliating cold calls to uninterested customers on a cheap headset, he heard the break room television volume suddenly increase. The shift manager had turned the channel to a national news network. Marcus looked up from his script, wiping the exhausted sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. The small, dusty television mounted in the corner of the room was tuned directly to a prominent news station. The bright red breaking news banner across the bottom of the screen announced a special live interview covering the shifting landscape of global finance. Marcus felt the breath completely leave his lungs. His jaw dropped open and the cheap plastic headset slipped off his ear, hitting the linoleum floor with a hollow, loud thud. There, on the national television screen, sitting across from a highly respected financial journalist, was me. I was wearing a flawless, vibrant, tailored power suit, looking radiant, incredibly confident, and entirely untouchable. The television anchor leaned forward and excitedly introduced me to the millions of viewers watching across the entire country, referring to me not just as the brilliant chief executive officer of Apex Ventures, but as one of the most powerful and influential women in modern global business. Marcus stared blankly at the dusty television screen, completely paralyzed by intense, overwhelming regret. The magnificent billionaire titan commanding the absolute attention of the entire world was the exact same brilliant woman he had callously thrown away for absolutely nothing but his pathetic ego. The bright studio lights of the premier global financial network reflected off the polished glass desk, separating me from the veteran anchor. We were broadcasting live during the highly coveted primetime evening slot, and the entire nation was watching. I sat comfortably in a sleek, modern leather chair, wearing a flawless, vibrant, tailored power suit that radiated absolute, unbothered authority. The seasoned journalist sitting across from me leaned forward with an expression of genuine fascination. She looked at me and asked the exact question that the elite executives of Wall Street had been whispering about for the past 6 months. She wanted to know the ultimate secret behind my unprecedented meteoric rise from the quiet shadows of private angel investing to becoming the ruthless commanding chief executive officer of Apex Ventures. I offered the camera a perfectly measured, serene smile. I did not raise my voice or speak with arrogant bluster. I answered the journalist with the calm, lethal precision of a woman who had completely mastered her entire domain. I explained clearly that the true secret to building a lasting, indestructible empire was the willingness to ruthlessly trim dead weight from your portfolio. I looked directly into the television camera lens and spoke eloquently about how both corporate structures and personal lives often become severely bloated with underperforming toxic assets. I stated that true exponential growth only happens when you actively stop investing your valuable time and capital into entities that constantly diminish your worth. I emphasize the critical importance of absolute independence and the strict necessity of walking away from environments built on manipulation, deceit, and false prestige. I continued my televised masterclass in public shade by explaining that a highly intelligent investor never settles for the mere illusion of success. I noted smoothly that people who rely entirely on stolen credit and loud, arrogant charisma always eventually collapse under the crushing weight of their own profound mediocrity. I said that whether you are dealing with a failing executive management department or a profoundly unsupportive personal partnership, you must find the inner courage to sever the tie completely and rebuild your foundation on unshakable integrity. Every single eloquently delivered syllable was a classy, razor-sharp, unspoken dagger aimed directly at the heart of my disgraced ex-husband. Miles away from the pristine high-definition television studio, Marcus stood completely frozen in the dingy, cramped break room of his discount cellular store. The flickering fluorescent overhead light hummed loudly, casting a sickly, pale yellow pallor over his stained, scratchy polyester uniform shirt. He could not tear his bloodshot, exhausted eyes away from the small, dusty television monitor mounted in the top corner of the room. My calm, authoritative voice echoed from the cheap built-in speakers, wrapping tightly around his throat and suffocating him with the agonizing, inescapable reality of his monumental failure. He felt a sharp, painful burning sensation in his chest, as every metaphorical dagger I threw on national television landed perfectly on target. A young teenage coworker named Jason walked into the depressing break room, holding a lukewarm can of cheap discount soda. Jason stopped right next to Marcus and looked up at the television screen, completely captivated by my commanding on-screen presence. Jason took a slow sip of his soda and let out a loud, highly appreciative whistle. He nudged Marcus forcefully in the ribs with his elbow. Jason shook his head in absolute awe and loudly commented that the billionaire chief executive on the screen was unbelievably incredible and breathtakingly brilliant. The teenager laughed a careless, oblivious laugh and casually remarked that whatever stupid, arrogant blind man fumbled a magnificent, powerful woman like that was probably crying himself to sleep in some pathetic, lonely gutter right now. The careless, offhand comment from a teenage shift manager felt like a violent physical blow to Marcus' stomach. Marcus could not defend himself. He could not puff out his chest and arrogantly brag about his elite corporate status. He could not demand immediate respect or leverage his prestigious fraternity connections. He was nothing but a broke, exhausted retail worker eating instant noodles on a highly monitored 15-minute lunch break. He simply stood there in total silent, agonizing regret. The crushing, inescapable weight of his own profound stupidity pressed down heavily on his slumped shoulders, forcing him to silently watch the woman he used to treat like an embarrassing mid-level burden currently rule the entire global financial world without him. Back in the brightly lit broadcast studio, the veteran journalist shifted her printed notes and smiled warmly at me. She noted to the audience that my aggressive restructuring of the financial sector had already sent massive shockwaves through Wall Street, permanently changing the industry standard overnight. The anchor leaned forward, her eyes bright with intense journalistic curiosity, and asked what the entire global market was desperate to know. She asked me what was next on the horizon for the unstoppable juggernaut that was Apex Holdings. I allowed a slow, knowing, predatory smile to spread across my face. I looked directly into the camera lens, once more fully aware of the sheer power my words held over the financial markets and over the people who had desperately tried to destroy me. I announced smoothly that Apex Holdings was aggressively expanding our operations far beyond the financial district of Manhattan. I revealed with absolute chilling confidence that we had just officially finalized a massive hostile acquisition of a sprawling commercial real estate portfolio directly targeting the Midwest. The morning following my highly publicized national television interview dawned crisp and perfectly clear. The winter air sweeping through the bustling streets of Manhattan felt incredibly refreshing as my private car pulled up to the towering glass facade of the Apex Holdings headquarters. I stepped out onto the pristine pavement, feeling an overwhelming sense of profound absolute victory. The relentless corporate war I had waged over the past 6 months was finally drawing to a definitive, spectacular close. My aggressive restructuring of the financial sector was complete, and the hostile acquisition of the massive Midwest real estate portfolio I had boldly announced on live television was already sending lucrative shockwaves through the global market. I was no longer a silent shadow operating behind the scenes. I was the undeniable architect of my own massive empire. As I adjusted the collar of my tailored designer coat and prepared to walk through the heavy glass revolving doors, my lead security detail suddenly stepped in front of me, holding up a cautioning hand. I paused and followed his stern gaze toward the edge of the corporate plaza. Standing right there, shivering slightly in the cold morning wind, was the very last ghost from my toxic past. It was Beatrice Vance. My former mother-in-law had spent hours waiting on the freezing concrete pavement just to ambush me outside my own building. The woman who had spent the last 5 years treating me like an uncultured peasant, who had relentlessly mocked my historically black college degree and demanded that I quietly submit to her arrogant golden boy son, looked completely unrecognizable. Beatrice was no longer the haughty, intimidating matriarch holding court at elite high society country club dinners. Her expensive designer coat looked rumpled, and her perfectly styled hair was disheveled by the biting wind. The crushing reality of her son becoming a disgraced unemployed felon, and her white son-in-law facing serious federal prison time, had entirely shattered her fragile, arrogant illusion of superiority. When Beatrice saw me standing on the plaza surrounded by my elite security detail, she immediately lunged forward. My guards instantly moved to intercept her, physically blocking her from getting anywhere near me, but I raised a single calm hand and instructed them to stand down. I did not need to hide behind muscle. I was more than ready to face the woman who had enabled my ex-husband's toxic behavior for his entire life. I took a slow, deliberate step toward her. Beatrice's eyes were wide and frantic, filled with a pathetic, desperate combination of lingering entitlement and sheer panic. She did not offer an apology. She did not express any genuine remorse for the way her family had brutally treated me. Instead, she immediately launched into a frantic, breathless tirade demanding financial restitution for her ruined son. Beatrice raised her voice, pointing a shaking finger at my face. She accused me of deliberately and maliciously destroying Marcus' promising career. She cried that he was currently suffering working a grueling, humiliating entry-level retail job at a depressing strip mall and struggling to survive on minimum wage. She audaciously claimed that because I was now a wildly successful billionaire, I owed Marcus a massive multi-million-dollar alimony settlement to compensate for the emotional damage I had allegedly inflicted upon him. She begged and demanded that I write a check to save her family from total, absolute bankruptcy, claiming that I owed them for allowing me into their prestigious elite circles in the first place. She insisted that without her family I would be nothing. I stood perfectly still and let her completely exhaust herself. I listened to her ridiculous, unhinged demands without interrupting, without shouting, and without showing a single ounce of anger. When she finally ran out of breath and stood panting on the cold concrete waiting for my response, I offered her a look of pure, unadulterated pity. I spoke with a voice that was incredibly calm, cold, and entirely unshakable. I told Beatrice that I did not destroy her son. I explained clearly that Marcus had systematically destroyed his own life with his blind greed, his rampant infidelity, and his profound, unearned arrogance. I reminded her that Marcus had willingly chosen to commit federal wire fraud to fund a secret luxury lifestyle for his demanding mistress, while treating his loyal wife like an embarrassing burden. I stated factually that the universe had simply handed Marcus the exact severe consequences he had meticulously earned. I noted that her complete inability to hold her grown son accountable was the exact reason he was currently failing. Beatrice shook her head violently, tears of denial streaming down her cheeks. She tried to interrupt, trying to make pathetic excuses for his criminal behavior, but I stepped forward and cut her off completely, closing the distance between us. You raised a boy who measures his worth by the price tag of his suit and the submission of his wife. I said my words slicing through the crisp winter air with absolute lethal precision. I am neither a price tag nor a subordinate. Take responsibility for your son, Beatrice, because I no longer have to. The devastating truth of my words hit her like a physical blow. Beatrice's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The arrogant, manipulative matriarch was finally rendered entirely speechless. She stared at me, her eyes wide with the horrifying realization that her golden boy was a complete failure, and she had absolutely no one left to blame but herself. She could not manipulate me, she could not guilt me, and she could certainly never control me again. I did not wait for her to formulate a response. I did not need to hear another single word from her for the rest of my life. I simply turned my back on the shivering, broken woman standing on the pavement. I walked smoothly and confidently through the towering glass-paneled doors of my building, leaving the bitter, toxic remnants of the Vance family outside in the cold where they belonged. The heavy security doors locked securely behind me, echoing with a satisfying, definitive click. The severance from my toxic family was now absolute and irreversible. 6 months passed since the freezing Christmas Eve that fundamentally altered the trajectory of my entire existence. The bitter, biting winds of that Manhattan winter had fully surrendered to the warm, golden embrace of a perfect July afternoon. I stood on the sprawling teak deck of my private oceanfront estate in the Hamptons, allowing the gentle, salty breeze to brush against my skin. The massive property which I had acquired seamlessly during my hostile takeover of the Midwest and East Coast luxury portfolios was completely shielded from the public eye by tall natural hedges and towering majestic oak trees. It was a secluded, pristine sanctuary, built entirely on my own uncompromising terms. The atmosphere surrounding the estate today was incredibly vibrant, filled with the rich melodic sounds of a live rhythm and blues band playing softly near the custom infinity pool, and the genuine, unfiltered laughter of people who actually cared about each other. I held a crystal flute of vintage champagne, watching the brilliant sunlight dance across the rolling Atlantic waves. The air smelled faintly of sweet blooming jasmine and sea salt. For the first time in over 5 long, exhausting years, I was completely and utterly at peace. This beautiful, spectacular summer gathering was the absolute antithesis of the stiff, pretentious high society events Marcus used to forcefully drag me to. There were no arrogant, desperate social climbers aggressively networking for corporate leverage. No mediocre, corrupt executives boasting loudly about fraudulent accomplishments, and no entitled racist in-laws constantly judging my family pedigree or my historically black college degree. The phenomenal, loyal people filling my immaculate, lush gardens today were my true chosen family. Valerie, my brilliant and fiercely ruthless lead, corporate counsel, was currently standing near the outdoor kitchen, laughing loudly while sharing a massive, delicious plate of grilled seafood with the 5 incredibly brilliant black and brown women I had enthusiastically promoted to vice presidents on my very first day as chief executive officer. They were thriving beautifully under the new, strict, meritocratic regime, successfully turning sterling financials into an absolute powerhouse of corporate innovation and unshakable financial integrity. I also clearly saw my own supportive, loving relatives mingling happily by the sparkling water. The wonderful aunts and uncles who had always encouraged my quiet ambitions and never demanded that I shrink myself to fit into a fragile, insecure man's shadow. We were deeply surrounded by authentic love and mutual respect. Nobody here measured their personal worth by the exorbitant price tag of their tailored designer suit, the prestigious zip code of their elite country club, or the latest model of their imported luxury car. They measured it entirely by steady character, fierce loyalty, and relentless hard work. I took a slow, deeply satisfying sip of my cold champagne and walked deliberately away from the lively, joyful crowd, moving gracefully toward the quiet edge of the vast property, where the manicured green lawn met the soft white sand of the private beach. Feeling the gentle warmth of the afternoon sun, radiating deeply into my shoulders, as I breathed in the fresh, revitalizing air, I stood completely alone, listening to the rhythmic, soothing crashing of the ocean waves against the pristine, sparkling shoreline below. My mind briefly drifted back to that incredibly dark, terrible night at John F. Kennedy International Airport. Just 6 months ago, I vividly remembered the exact agonizing feeling of the freezing sleet soaking right through my thin wool winter coat. I remembered the heavy, suffocating weight of my foolish ex-husband, cruel, dismissive words, when he boldly told me my mid-level administrative presence would severely embarrass him in front of his wealthy boss. I remembered the profound, terrifying isolation of being entirely locked out of my own home simply because I did not conveniently fit his pathetic, arrogant illusion of elite success. The stunning, absolute contrast between that shivering, abandoned woman standing alone on the damp concrete curb and the untouchable billionaire titan I had successfully become was absolutely undeniably staggering. I had not simply survived the ultimate malicious betrayal of the man who promised to love me and protect me. I had completely weaponized my profound pain, using it as the ultimate driving catalyst to flawlessly dismantle his toxic, fraudulent empire and meticulously build an indestructible, towering fortress of wealth and untouchable power in its direct place. I slowly looked down at my left hand. The delicate ring finger that once carried the heavy, suffocating symbol of a profoundly unequal, toxic marriage was now completely, permanently bare. I did not miss the cold, sparkling diamond ring. I did not miss the constant, silent, agonizing pressure to repeatedly diminish my own brilliant light, just to keep a thoroughly mediocre man completely comfortable in his own skin. The spectacular, devastating public downfall of Marcus and Connor, the complete, humiliating social ruin of my former mother-in-law, Beatrice, and the permanent professional blacklisting of the greedy, entitled mistress who genuinely thought she could easily fund her luxury lifestyle with my stolen marital assets were simply the natural, unavoidable consequences of their own malicious, rampant greed. They had foolishly tried to bury a vibrant seed deep in the freezing, unforgiving dirt, without ever realizing they were directly dealing with a powerful visionary woman who rightfully owned the entire agricultural landscape. I had successfully rightfully reclaimed my stolen identity, my absolute financial freedom, and my undeniable lasting peace of mind forever. I raised my crystal flute toward the endless, beautiful ocean horizon, offering a quiet, deeply silent, triumphant toast to the incredible, massive, limitless future stretching out brilliantly, endlessly before me. The greatest vital lesson I ever learned from my spectacular corporate revenge was profoundly simple but eternally powerful. You must absolutely never, ever beg for a designated assigned seat at a table where basic human respect and mutual loyalty are no longer being freely served. You simply stand up, walk away with absolute, flawless, unbothered grace, and aggressively buy the entire restaurant completely instead. True family is defined by mutual respect and support, not merely by bloodlines. When toxic relatives belittle your achievements, manipulate your trust, or abandon you during a crisis, the most powerful response is establishing unbreakable boundaries. Healing begins when you stop accepting conditional love and start prioritizing your own independence and self-worth. Ultimate revenge is never about seeking destruction. It is simply building a highly successful, authentic life and confidently walking away from environments where respect is no longer served. Have you ever cut ties to protect your peace? Share your story in the comments below, and subscribe for more empowering content.